Good morning. Good morning. This is Clayton Jarvinen, founder of Thoughts from Sunrise, and welcome to my first podcast. As we go along, they'll get fancier. I'll probably have some graphics seen in the front. However, I'm still learning the software, and it hasn't been a priority, so I'm getting to it. But today, on my first podcast, normally I'd want to do something that's uplifting. I would want to do something that's lighthearted and fun. And today, I'm going to talk about death. Eventually, we'll all experience it. We all have. I know. Excuse me. I'm just getting up. And the reason I'm choosing that is it's kind of front and center right now in my life, my family. So I know it's something that most everybody will be able to resonate with at some point in their life. Some of you are experiencing it right now. Some of you still fresh. And for me, it's pretty fresh. I am tomorrow going to a service for my brother-in-law, who was just killed on a motorcycle tragically just a few weeks ago. So he's got his parents in town, his family, sister, and his sister's wife are in town from England. And he left behind 4 children, my nieces and nephews, my sister, who is ex-wife, and all of his friends. And so it's not easy for everybody. I'm hoping that this talk about death sometimes can be controversial because we feel so much loss, and so there's so much emotion that's at stake, and there's so much tenderness, fear, anger, uncertainty, and obviously the definite feeling of loss that comes up. And so what I'd like to do is offer a perspective on this, and some people may be able to grasp this and others might not yet. But I think when we're suffering, perspective, a change of perspective is often very helpful, because not only does it have the possibility of easing suffering, it gives us an opportunity to step outside of the framework in where we're standing right now. And usually when we're in a tragic situation, when we're in really tough, heightened emotional response, it's really hard to step outside and to see something another way other than how we've been taught. And I know for me, growing up, I was taught that death is loss. Death is, it's tragic, it's terrible. If you watch the news, if you watch anything, you talk to anybody, it's a terrible situation, and it's something you want to avoid. And we live our lives avoiding death, at least in this part of the world. And I live in the United States, and in the Western world, it's a terrible situation. And I don't want to discount the heavy feelings that may be had. I don't want to discount the sense of loss or the sadness that comes up. I'm hoping that with this perspective is that there can be an allowance for these things, but without them being overbearing, without them being overtaking you as the days goes on. There's a possibility that there could also be great joy in death. There could be a great relief in death. But we have to have a different perspective. We have to have tools to work with what comes up in the moment, with all the heightened emotion and all the thoughts. And with those tools, it's possible to kind of allow the experience, allow what comes up, and then watch what happens. I think it's a gift for the deceased to practice this and to allow the space. I know in I think it's Buddhism, and even in old ancient Christianity and Judaism, as I recall, there is a practice where you're not supposed to have a crying person around the body, because the soul is still attached to the body for like 3 days after death. So you don't want to confuse it while the soul is still looking down, not in pain, but not understanding that there's been this, separation since they've been identified with the body for so long. I know that in Christianity, the identification with the body is one of the false idols that we have, that and belief in our thoughts. And you'll notice in suffering that if you follow the thoughts and the feeling and you allow space for them to arise, if you allow enough space for them to arise without fighting them, you might notice that the thoughts and the feelings don't actually correlate. And so there's an intense emotion that can come up. There's this welling of energy in the body, and when we attach our thoughts to it, our thoughts of, and usually it's thoughts of separation, and the thoughts of separation in this instance is he was taken away from me, or I'm never going to see him again, or things in that nature. And when you attach those thoughts to an intense feeling, it feels like pain. It feels like massive, massive suffering. And when we allow the space for these things to arise, and the energy comes up, if we let go of the thoughts, the idea of the whole tragedy, the mess, the oh no, what are we going to do, the fact that you won't see that body again as you become familiar with it, and you allow those feelings to come up, it's such a great gift, and I can't tell you what will happen. It'll depend on your ability to let go of the thoughts, the sense of loss, the meaning that we overlay our feelings. When we let go of those not cognitive, but those mental illustrations that we overlay over what's actually occurring now, and right now something intense is coming up in my body, and I'm feeling it. And if I allow these mental images to sort of go off to the wayside, and I get present with this thing in here, there is a massive amount of healing that can occur. And when I say that, I also recognize that the mind is quickly going to go, yeah, but is that going to bring him back? And I'm not making any illusions that that will occur, that it's going to bring him back. But what can occur is that it can bring some, say, knowledge to your experience that helps to ease the suffering, so that you start to feel better, not about the loss, but this suffering that we're experiencing is not necessarily tied to a single person. It's not tied to a body. So it's sort of a gift. I like to look at it as a gift to humanity, to be able to do this practice. And when you understand how connected everything is, I've had my own experiences of doing this, so what I'm talking about is not something that hasn't been practiced and isn't practiced. This is an active part of my life, and it's really shown me how connected everything and everyone is on a very deep fundamental level. So I know that when we allow this process to go through and it eases our own suffering, it also helps us to relate with the world better, so that way we can support others, we can share things, we can be in the world without feeling overtaken by the world. And when so another thing that came up this morning when I was in the shower, thinking about the death process, and this idea that the body is the idol. If you think about it, let's say you live overseas, or you can live across the street. I live across the street from my parents. and I rarely do we see each other, not for any purpose other than our habitual patterns. And but if you think about it, most of the time in our lives we spend not actually physically in the presence of someone, yet we can draw an image of them in our mind. We know them, or we say we know them, and most waking hours are not spent actually engaging with the physical body. Most waking hours are engaged with our mind. And that's especially true if you live, other states or other countries where, we catch up once in a while. A good friend of mine just called yesterday that lives in Dubai, and we chatted for about 20 minutes, and it's been many months since we've spoken. But there's still a feeling there. There's a bond, there is a kinship, and a certain caring. But I can't say that I only know him through my own mind. When the bodies engage, this is a tough one for me I'm gonna have to flesh this one out in a different podcast, I think. So I think, I'll mark that down as a topic for another podcast to flesh out just that part that I was about to mention. So nix that. Hopefully that's not too confusing. So is the idea that this body. So we have experienced life through these five senses: your smell, your sight, your touch, the five basics. Some claim we have a sixth sense. New research has just come out that we have 12 senses that we're only becoming aware of, and I believe we have way more than that, because we are not the body. And when we identify with the body, when we say that this person is the body, then there is a tremendous loss, because that body can no longer be touched. And I think that's the hard thing, is when we identify this being, this soul, the spiritual being that has been growing, this body that he was in, went from a thought and an action into these cells that got together, that then started morphing and growing and going through this life experience. And you can't say that the body is this person, other than this body was the vehicle in which we experienced this being, because that body was never the same at any instance of life. Cells were regenerating, cells were dying on it, cells were growing on it. It was the being inside of the body, and that being has been interacted with, whether you are in front of the body, or if you're 1,000 miles away from the body, or 10,000 miles away from the body. Only when we identify with the body as reality, when we identify as the body as the person, as the source of being of that person, it doesn't allow us to access the other senses. And if you recognize that the body was only the vehicle for a tangible experience of this being, and it was a receptive vehicle for this being to express himself in life, this aspect of the being to express himself in life, then you can recognize that while you're not physically touching or in front of this person, engaging face to face, when you're halfway around the world, you're still engaging through your thought, through your mind and your heart, and that connection is there, and that's what maintains that relationship through distances as well. And so during a time of crisis, during a time of seeming loss, all we've lost was the use of those five senses to engage and interact and to love that being that we know. And it's just it's an unfortunate situation that is only how we've somehow been conditioned to believe that those are the only ways to interact. And so we get attached to those ways of interacting and say, this is how it has to happen. When we recognize that the body is just a temporary vehicle, but life is forever. When you sink into the heart, when you allow the energy to well up in you, and release from the ideas of loss and the sense of loss, and you can just allow this stuff to come up, we can kind of tune into other senses of knowingness, and realize that you are always in communication with that being, because that being is so deeply a part of you that there is no real separation. So the loss of a body is an illusion, but there is no real separation. You are not ever separated from the person you knew as your father, your husband, your wife, your brother, your sister, your grandparents, your friends. There's no real separation. It's just the attachment to the body. It's identification with the body, where you say, this is me. This body is only a vehicle for the being that is expressing itself through the body. And it is a tiny aspect. It's considered the worst place in all of existence to be, also the best at the same time. If you were aware of all of the influences that affected all of your thoughts, actions, behaviors, all of your impulses to do things, if you're aware of all of those, you wouldn't want to be here. The body's it's a terrible place. And the only benefit of being in the body is that we have a choice. And we have a choice of how to relate with each moment as it arises. That's what would be called free will. It's not to say we have free will to go and do anything you want, because I think we can pretty much universally agree that while you say you want to do all these things, you can't, because there's way too many obstacles that you have to fight against in order to accomplish anything. And I think most people would not be living the lives completely as they are if they had complete free will to make any choice they wanted. What you do have free will of is to choose to relate with each moment as it arises with openness or closeness. So we open our hearts or we close our hearts. We allow ourselves to be vulnerable or we protect ourselves. And when we relate to fear and all these negative, denser energy, emotional responses, that's when we're closing ourselves from our experience. And when we open ourselves to the experience, we are allowing all of the feelings to come up and allowing space for them, because that is part of our experience of life. And so when we open up, or it means we're allowing the discomfort to exist. We're allowing it's discomfort, I guess. Any negative feeling is uncomfortable. You want to get rid of it. And so we try to push it away, and we push it away either with our thoughts or with habitual patterns where we cover it up. We'll get busy to do things. You know, there's always plenty of work to do. There's always plenty of projects to get into to mask the discomfort. And we also have a choice to just sit and allow what comes up to come up, allow the discomfort to come up. And the cool thing about the body and being in the body that, as I understand, other realms of existence don't have, the angelic realms, the astral realms, other realms that are way beyond our five senses, that actually overlay our experience right now. So while we're in the body, we have five senses. When you're identified with the body, you have these five senses. When you loosen the identification with the body and you become a witness to it, it allows you to have access to other extrasensory perception, supersensory perception, all sorts of things that are above the five senses, more universal, as opposed to, you live this little ball down here on Earth, Instead, it goes up to here, so you're in, more outer space in the universe, let's say, and so it gives you more perspective of things, and more access to other senses of knowingness. I just lost track on that thought. That's all right. It might come back. Usually things come full circle if you let things ride out. So this idea of choice and of free will. So in the moment while you're suffering, it's so easy to get caught in the headspace of doom and gloom and it's a terrible situation. And I would just implore those that are interested, that are tired of suffering, to allow the feelings to come up, allow everything to come up in you, and give it space. Breathe space into it. Breathe trust into it. Breathe not knowingness into it, and the not knowingness, breathe it being okay to not know into it. Breathe that great depth of relief of, I don't have to dictate what this means. I don't have to know what it means. I don't have to say this is good or bad. You can let go of that and just allow it to occur. And I know for a fact that those that are willing to do it, it'll change your life, and it will I'm not going to say it's going to take away sadness anytime you think of the person. I still have people in my life that when I think about, sadness still comes up, and but I also know that sadness masks joy, and a lot of times the hard emotions actually hide behind it at another layer, good things. It can recontextualize your knowing of something, and a lot of our happy feelings also mask painful feelings. So a lot of our times to acquire happiness are actually masking deep pains, and during death a lot of times all of these hidden things can come up. So it's very important for healing other areas of your life to be present to this. And the thing that I had forgotten temporarily, and now I'm remembering, is this idea of the body. Once you know the amount of influences that are hovering over us, affecting and influencing our decisions, our habitual patterns, our thoughts, our desires, once you're aware of even a smidgen of a fraction of all of those influences, you would be rejoicing when someone leaves the body. They're no longer beholden to these influences. So while they may be in a realm where they might not have a choice, they're out of the body and out of suffering. So there is other realms where you're just there, but you're just there. You are experiencing freedom from the body. If you've ever skydived or say powder skied, when you're on a mountain and you're going down and all of a sudden you hit this spot of powder, and all of a sudden everything around you goes silent and you're just floating, and it's like weightlessness. Maybe I've heard recently that when some of the astronauts that come back and they get interviewed, and their favorite thing about being in outer space was the weightlessness. And so that's what it could be like. You have this weightlessness and this sense of the entire body knowingness, but not solid physical body. Say it's an etheric body, or it's we become identified with the greater body of the universe, and it's incredibly blissful. And so there's no longer the memory and the thought of loss, because when you get enveloped into the whole thing, you are that, and it's not an issue. The body, the conditions of the body, how it came and went don't matter. We only make it matter when we're so attached and identified with it. So when you understand this, and if you believe this to be true, or if you have an inkling that there's a possibility of it. Um, it's freedom when the body goes, when the identification with the body goes, and when that being is ready or wanting to do more work on earth through the body, because the body is the level in which you can go from the bottom to the top. And this can happen over millions and millions of lifetimes. But when that being is ready to come back and do work, that being, not he or she, but that body of energy, that part of consciousness, is wanting to go back to either help or to work on different levels of its relationship. Sort of like how energy patterns self-correct over time, where you take one tuning fork here and you have another one here, and this one's a higher vibration, this is a lower vibration. When this one vibrates, eventually this lower vibration one will, if this one is maintained, this lower vibration one will eventually resonate at the same frequency as the higher one. And so let's say you have the God creation, the highest vibration possible, that is sort of fundamentally responsible for this amazing, incredible thing that we call life, that we have no idea about how it came about, and this idea that we can form words and have consciousness, have thoughts, and have all these different relationships and feel like I'm drinking a cup of coffee. It's just such an amazing thing. And so that higher vibration up here, which is the ultimate level of creation, of existence, and we're down here way at the bottom. And so there is a natural inclination, since we fluctuate all the time, we're never steady, we're vibrating very, very low, we have heavy thoughts, we have burdensome thoughts, we have these thoughts that we're separate, and this one's always vibrating constantly. And so eventually, over time, over millions of years, we are raising our vibration, and we're at a point where that's occurring more rapidly now, and will eventually become attuned to that higher vibration. That happens automatically, and then in this body, and so that happens automatically over eons and eons and eons, millions, billions, and trillions of years, is that happens, which that's just from our dense perspective of time, which time doesn't actually exist, but consider that's what it appears to be from where we're at. Where, say, my brother-in-law is right now, there is no time. The person I knew as Andy, that being, he's in a timeless space. We'll consider that he is. You can't. Anything I'm doing, anything I'm saying is for perspective. It's not. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying that it is absolute. I'm offering a perspective that when you test it out, if you choose to test it out, if you choose to just be and allow the spaciousness for the emotions to arise, or the energy in the body to arise, and you're just with it, it might allow you to get a taste of that knowingness for yourself. So I only speak from personal experience, and I share a perspective that those that do the work of allowing the stuff to come up also share the same experience and the same knowingness. But you have to do it. You have to allow yourself to feel the pain without the labels, to allow yourself to feel the hardship without the story. And when you do, the experience becomes universal. So if you do that, if you take this perspective, while we're in the body, it allows us to do the work so we can raise our vibration and attune with that higher vibration consciously, as opposed to the automatic thing, which is just a long, slow thing with a lot of suffering involved, mostly because of ignorance, or I'd say only because of ignorance. And so when the being decides that they want to come back and do some work, is we come in through a receptive body, through the baby, and we're in the perfect conditions. Everything in our life is the perfect thing for what we needed for the work that we chose to do. I know when my brother-in-law was in the hospital and he was on his hooked up to machines, fully supported pretty much by machines, lungs, breathing, heart, and all of that stuff. He went through massive illness, pneumonia, fever, tremendous bodily ailments other than just the injuries themselves. And it was really neat to see, not in a way that I celebrate. It's just, well, I kind of, from the perspective that I have, it was not a bad situation. He was no longer able to use his body for distractions, so he was just there. And when the body contracts fever and pneumonia and other ailments and the injuries too, it's a way to work through old karmas, and it's actually a way to release from negative patterns and old limiting ways of being. And so I feel that on the last throes of this life, he actually did a tremendous amount of work. And when that was completed, the decision was, finally made that he would no longer, that he would not want to live in the body in the conditions that he was in. And so the machines were turned off. But I do not believe that decision was come to without his influence. I believe that if he still had more work to do, the family would not have been ready to let him go, thinking it was for his benefit. And I think that thought was accurate. But what they may not be aware of is that he made the decision, that he did the work that he came here to do, and he did it on the last of his days, while he was in the hospital bed. That intensity, the fever, the fever is a deep anger, and usually we have a lot of anger because we feel separate from our Creator, and so we go through life with little bits and spurts of anger, and we think it's the other person, or we think it's a situation, or we got screwed on this deal or that deal, and there's anger. But the fundamental anger is the anger that we feel separated from our Creator, not realizing that we did it to ourselves. And so on his last days, while in the machines, he contracted a bad fever, and then he caught pneumonia, and these other things that came up, and even the bones in the body and all the organs, they represent something in life. And I really feel that on his last days, he did the work. He was able to not have the five senses of the body to distract from doing the work, since we're not actually taught the tools as we grow up through our educational system, through school, and life in general in this culture. It doesn't teach us how to do the work. It's sort of luck, grace. Something gets us in front of the tools or the knowingness in order to work with these things. But when you're no longer beholden to the body, you're not there in your just consciousness looking down, and the body's hooked up to machines, it really gives you a chance to work through these things without the distractions. And so the body will go through its iterations. The body will go through the processes of what these things represent. And it brings it up. It's a great communication device. And so as the body's bringing these things up, it gives consciousness a chance to refine, to let go of the negative, heavy energies, and to perfect itself. And I really believe that that is the work that he did on the last of his days. And because everything is so connected, there's no disconnection other than the thoughts that there is, that the and maybe this can bring a little bit of peace to the family, is that their decision was not against him, it was not selfish, is that decision was also influenced by his consciousness. Having done the work, he was ready to not be in the body anymore. So I think death is not a terrible thing. I think it's a great opportunity, and it's something that I've contemplated since I was a child. Also having attempted, gone through contemplating death, contemplating existence since early childhood, to the point of also contemplating suicide heavily, close to attempting, and then going through stages of realization and realizing that we are not the body. We are an eternal being, and what that means, how the body operates in the world, and I think death is a great opportunity to embrace life, not to hold on to it. It is temporary in this form, but to embrace it and to use it for its greatest benefit. And I believe its greatest benefit is to let go of the idea of separation, let go of the idea that we're alone, that we're insignificant and powerless. Is there's such a deep connection and usefulness for the body to get reconnected with the whole. And I think that there's a great opportunity to bring that up. And so in the process of going through something tragic, is just allow what comes up. Give it some space. You can always go back to the thoughts of suffering. You can always take up the thoughts of loss. You can always ruminate over the tragedy whenever you want. But while you're doing that, try to remember to create some space for yourself, a safe space where you can breathe and you can allow the feelings to come up, and allow the stories and the images in the mind to kind of fall away for a little bit, and just be present to yourself. You have to give yourself a hug and allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, and let that, say, burn itself up. Let it go through the process it needs to. If we try to mask it and we try to cover it up, it doesn't get its chance to come up and out and perfect itself. So give it some space. And with that, I will sign off. I apologize if my first podcast is a dark podcast, but I think it's also one of the most important, most poignant. So say I love you, and until next time, have a great day.